Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Rentschler. I'm a professor at the University of Buffalo, and I am moderating this session. Our session, Building a Regional Network of Universities Across Borders Under COVID-19, includes three panelists, and I give a brief introduction to the project that we are all connected with. I see that Francois from Switzerland connected also to our session. If you have got any questions or comments or so forth, please provide them in the chat box. And there is also the question and answer section in your window that you can provide your information from. Please introduce yourself also in the chat box so that we know who is in the audience and that we can have a little bit of a feel like that this is a real session. We're all in the same room. So to begin with, I'm going to share the presentation here. So the presentation will give a little bit of more information about our project. Can you see the slides? I'm going to ask the panelists to confirm that the slides are up.
Yes, looks good.
Okay. So here you see a picture of Buffalo, actually, and Lake Erie. And in our project, the Organizing Urban Transects for a Sustainable Transformation of Economic Partnerships that is built on the UN sustainability goals, we're having a collaboration. Our panel members are Susan Powers, a professor at Clarkson University. Then we have got Susan Clark from University of Buffalo. And we have got Richard Ross Shaker from Ryerson University. And each of them will get the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and highlight their contributions and expertise in this field. My name is Chris Rentschler. I'm at the University of Buffalo, and I'm the PI of this project that is supported by the National Science Foundation. And it's a relatively small grant, but we were able to connect to each other. Besides the UN sustainability goals, we also use an approach that I developed about 10 years ago as part of an National Institute for Standards and Technology project, where we looked at the resiliency of systems. So while the SDGs are focusing on particular aspects of our society, we have had at that time an approach to look at 7 interdependent systems and their resilience against events that would diminish or would reduce their system functionality. So you can imagine that you have got a system that works, that has got 100% reliance, like a physical infrastructure, for example. That would be the letter P indicated here in the People's Resilience Framework. And if you've got a power outage or partly a power outage in your community, then there is this bouncing back and recovery function that you would like to investigate. So we did this, and we came up with 7 dimensions of resilience that you see here. So the one is population dynamics, then ecosystem services and environmental systems. Then we have got organized governmental services, the physical infrastructure that I just mentioned, and lifelines that are important, but also lifestyle community competence, economic services, and social and cultural services. And to split it into those 7, we looked at different kind of functionalities. How do they come back? How can we build the resilience against shocks that we have in any of those systems, because we know that they're all interconnected. If you're interested in more in that information, you can look at the 2 references that are cited here. The second one is actually a global assessment report from the UN Disaster Risk Reduction that was done for the Sendai meeting in Japan in 2015. And then there is the peoplesresilience.org webpage. So in our project, we want to use the People's Resilience Framework as it's indicated here, and those particular system functions with their spatial and temporal footprints in landscape, as you can see on the maps indicated here, and allow basically an interconnected functionality to evaluate that. But we are also here in the Great Lakes region, in the lower Great Lakes region, so Erie and Lake Ontario, we are not only amongst the scientists, but also with stakeholders, we're trying to engage and to build trust to work together collaboratively. So it's about measuring and sharing information. It's about understanding and simulation. It's also to assess, engage, and improve these best management practices that stakeholders often use from a practical perspective, while the academics are looking at it from a more theoretical aspect and from a philosophical aspect. But to better collaborate and make better decisions, we need to reassess all of those continuously, and that means that we have to have long-term collaboration and coordination between those. What you can see here is the People's Resilience Framework in the center, and associated to that, the 17 SDGs that are there. And that allowed us to organize meetings and connect with different, different collaborators in particular working groups to collaborate and have not only one SDG, but also multiple SDGs, as well as multiple people's resilience dimensions included in our project planning in terms of addressing particular challenges in each of those. And to be effective, to reach out, we need to gain contact with different kind of audiences. I myself work, for example, with emergency managers. Others in our group are working maybe with sustainability officers and so forth. But we want to have both of those sides included. And another one is also that we have to cross not only an international boundary that we will talk about today, but also disciplinary boundaries and cultural boundaries. And here's an example in the collaboration with the Seneca Nation of Indians, where we basically have peoples as natives, and we again have got a 7-letter word, and we can identify how we're going to connect. We can connect on the people side with nations and as nation and neighbors. So we talk about the population, about teaching and trust, about infrastructure and lifelines, and then about economic aspects and development. At the same time, we deal with the environment, more in the wildland rural, as well as with the vision and community, that is of a lifestyle aspect. But what is most important, what we felt with Native Americans, is the spiritual aspect, so the social cultural heritage. But we also have that, and other parts of society also have that. So again, we are connecting on those 7, because often we realize that 17 is a little bit difficult for people to understand, but 7 is something that people can manage easier. So giving them access to the SDGs through these 7 people's resilience dimensions seem to work quite well. So everybody in our meetings, they created a badge to illustrate not only where they come from and so forth, but then they also have here one main SDG. Mine would be 15, and then you have got 13, 6, 17, and 11 as the minor ones, and that's what I bring to the table. And I'm looking basically for partners that match not only or can collaborate on those SDGs in terms of the interest and expertise, but also in terms of the people's resilience dimensions that you can see on, and E is the highlighted in red, which is mine one. And now I'm going to hand over to Susan Powers from Clarkson University, because here is her badge, and you kind of like can instantly see what she is focusing on. And I hand over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, my primary badge is sort of affordable and clean energy. I do a lot with the environmental impacts of sustainable energy systems, and that's related to climate action, but also it's essential for sustainable cities and responsible production and consumption. So using this badge is a great way to identify who I am, and I think that that's really important. But I'm also a professor of environmental engineering at Clarkson University. I've been here for decades. and I am the director of Clarkson's Institute for Sustainable Environment. Our institute is a cross-campus entity that brings together faculty, staff, and students to collectively tackle environmental challenges. Our university president has stated, "We will integrate sustainability into everything we do on campus." Using the Sustainable Development Goals has been an integral and effective means of communication with all operating units to help them understand their own roles within the realm of our campus sustainability initiatives. Similarly, as these badges illustrate, we use SDGs as part of our introductions at the OUTSTEP network as a great way to share a more complete view of who we are than what a name and title can do, and how we can work together. As part of Clarkson's internal sustainability network building, we also recognize the need to look beyond campus and to participate in sustainability and resilience solution at state and regional scales. Thus, we're a very active participant in the OutStep network. Next slide. OUTSTEP's concern with the lower Great Lake region, which includes Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and the upper reaches of the St. Lawrence River, stem from many changes we expect due to the climate, and the anticipated in-migration of residents to our region because of our relatively cool climate and abundant water resources, and the need to preserve culture, especially from the many communities of Indigenous populations in the region. In addition to the 5 states bordering this water resource, the Canadian province of Ontario is the northern border. This makes collaborating across the international border critical if we wish to preserve the function and ecosystem services that the region derives from this water resource. Climate-induced challenges, including extreme snow and ice events, including 7 feet of snow in the city of Buffalo a couple years ago, lake level fluctuations, which included very high water levels and flooding in Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River in recent years. So Clarkson University is at the northeast corner of this map. We are a small, technically oriented university of about 4,000 students. We have bachelor's through PhD degrees, mostly in STEM fields. Though we have 50 interdisciplinary faculty actively involved in our sustainability activities on campus, that's really small compared to what we need for a critical mass and a range of expertise to address the regional sustainability and resilience challenges. Our participation in OUTSTEPS has greatly increased the types of workshops, proposals, and research projects Clarkson faculty can participate. This is a great example of SDG number 17, Partnerships for Sustainability. Next slide. We were very fortunate to kick off our networking activities before COVID hit. A great workshop last summer provided us with an opportunity to get to know one another and understand the nature of our synergies and potential research partnerships. This photo shows the value of having geographers like Chris as workshop leaders. Maps and hands-on interactives were critically important to the 3-day in-person kickoff event. And although I'm a lover of maps, my research community within the boundaries of Clarkson University does not include geographers. I have personally learned a lot about the tools and research questions and the value of having geographers to collaborate and the necessity of this to tackle regional problems like the presented in the lower Great Lakes. Next slide. That initial face-to-face workshop was very valuable in establishing our network and kick off specific research activities. Since March, we've maintained some amount of that enthusiasm with communication, Zoom meetings, and this weekly, and we are in the middle of a virtual fall festival this week with 5-hour-long workshops to promote some of the key areas that we're working on within the network. Last week, over 50 participants attended 2 meetings with breakout rooms between conversations. I'll be participating tomorrow on a panel developing ideas for cross-network education program focusing on environmental justice in the region. Next slide. Communication across the network has been supported by 2 websites and the shared file system shown here. The OUTSTEP members website enables reviewing the members' expertise and locations to help build research teams. We expected to have all of these virtual resources even before the pandemic. But access to it has become even more important in the absence of an expected summer face-to-face workshop. These resources also add new challenges. Since we're all used to our own university's file systems, learning a different university's file system has been challenging, including how to share and open resources across institutions. The distance and lack of face-to-face meetings has resulted in the loss of a few members who were not willing to actively participate in weekly Zoom meetings and have faded off from our activities. We hope to regain their active engagement once we can occasionally meet in person again. I'd like to now introduce Professor Susan Clark, who will describe a specific example of the network research project.
Thank you, Sue, and good morning. So here's my sustainability badge. My name is Susan Clark, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Buffalo. While my training is primarily in the natural sciences, my PhD is in sustainability, and I looked at the relationships between human development and well-being indicators across the globe and resulting CO2 emissions to help inform climate mitigation policy as part of my dissertation. So that helps explain SDG 13 and 3 there that I've shown on the screen. My current work is centered around climate adaptation and community resilience, particularly focusing on the human dimensions of these issues, including outreach and education. There's SDG number 4. And I'm also currently very involved in a recycling project funded by New York State, which explains number 12. So my goal with this short presentation is to give you an example of an ongoing community partnership within the OUTSTEP network that is serving as a pilot for other types of sustainability projects we hope our network can help facilitate across our region. And we think it is particularly noteworthy because of the strong community stakeholder engagement aspects of the project. Next slide, please. This particular example is a climate vulnerability assessment of Erie County, which is in the westernmost county in upstate New York, and within which the city of Buffalo sits, in between Lake Erie to our west and Lake Ontario to our north. So the funding for this project is the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, who spearheads a program called Climate Smart Communities, and this funds projects for local climate action across the state, which includes aspects of mitigation and adaptation to climate impacts. A few years ago, I worked closely with our partners at Erie County Department of Environment and Planning, put together a proposal that would assess particular climate vulnerabilities for Erie County, which would help the county better plan for and mitigate the consequences of some of the potential changes headed their way due to climate change in the region. In Western New York, the climate impacts we are facing seem to be relatively less severe than in other areas in the nation. However, we definitely are expecting significant change. For example, depending on the emission scenario you use, the climate we might expect to experience in New York State by the end of my lifetime could be more like the current conditions experienced by South Carolina and northern Georgia. This means significant shifts in our average temperatures and annual precipitation, but also likely means we will experience more heat waves and more intense precipitation events in our region as well. So these are the types of changes that Erie County is interested in understanding so that they may better prepare for the future. Next slide. So getting to more of the important part here, this is the strong community and stakeholder engagement that I had mentioned that is so important to this type of work that we're doing. As I said, this is a collaboration between scholars and researchers at UB and Erie County, which is the primary governmental institution in our area that provides emergency health and human services to its residents, making it a key player in the ability of our communities to successfully respond and adapt to climate threats and hazards. In addition to this core team, we are heavily informed and guided by 2 stakeholder groups. One is an external group called the Erie County Community Climate Change Task Force, which is comprised of about 24 representatives from local organizations, municipalities, and agencies, and they're considered key stakeholders to the county's climate work. The other stakeholder group is an internal county group called the Green Team, and it's an interdepartmental team that works across the county's departments on sustainability initiatives. So it's really this heavy stakeholder component of our project that I think makes it unique from other more traditional academic work that often works in isolation from the community or sort of reports its findings to the community after the fact. Alternatively, what we are doing is a much more meaningful type of collaboration with our stakeholders in the region. Next slide. And so this slide represents the type of process we are trying to facilitate through this project, and again, as an example for other types of projects in the region. It's known in the sustainability literature as a process of knowledge co-production with our community partners and stakeholders. The idea here is that we are not being extractive with the community. In fact, we're not, doing short-term, one-off type projects. Instead, we are engaged in a much longer-term relationship with our partners, like Erie County, where each of our different perspectives and ways of knowing and doing are valued, and we work together towards shared goals that are beneficial to all involved, both academics and practitioners. And then my final slide, please. And so with this last slide, I just wanted to say that this type of work has been particularly challenging through the COVID-19 pandemic. In more, quote, normal times, we would be doing a lot of this stakeholder engagement in person, like shown in the left. However, we've continued to do this work instead with a remote environments like Zoom. In fact, in our project, we had to delay some of our stakeholder meetings with county representatives, especially those working in the emergency and social service sectors, who were particularly inundated during the beginning months of the pandemic. But we were able to remotely continue meeting with our external group as usual via Zoom, and were recently able to reestablish connection with the county internal team through a virtual meeting. So although these delays weren't ideal, I think this experience has only emphasized the need for resilience-related work like we are doing and why it is important. And for the project team, I think it has only taught us to be more adaptable, and it's forced us to be more aware and responsive to the needs of our community stakeholders in a way we just wouldn't have recognized if it weren't for the present situation. So all in all, our climate vulnerability assessment continues, and along the way keeps teaching us more and more about the challenges, but also the opportunities of community and stakeholder-driven work. And we're excited to do more of this kind of work in our region with the help of the OUTSTEP network. So now I'd like to hand it off to the last presenter, Professor Shaker. He's going to talk a little bit more about the international aspects of the network.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for joining us, and I appreciate the introduction, Susan. I am Richard Ross Shaker. I'm an Associate Professor of Urban and Environmental Sustainability at Ryerson University. Ryerson University is a public research university in downtown Toronto. It's a rather big university, roughly 45,000 students that we have there. And I originally got involved in the OUTSTEP network because I gave a colloquium presentation pre-COVID lockdown between Canada and the US at the University at Buffalo, and that's where I met my colleagues there. So that's how I originally got involved. And my research interests are sustainability indicators, sustainable development, landscape ecology, global change, and landscape planning. And how that relates to our badge here, you can see my main primary focus is sustainable cities and communities from more of a built perspective, more of a landscape design, architecture, landscape ecology lens, and my minor interest, climate action, where I've worked on landscape ecology and design aspects in New York City related to urban heat island, life below water, aquatic invasive species, aquatic ecological integrity, good health and well-being, more indicators that fall within sustainability initiatives and assessment initiatives. So looking at like well-being and sustainability indicators in cities, and then life on land, looking at, again, more forest patterning and how that relates to climate change and ecosystem well-being. Next slide, please, Chris. The first thing I want to talk about is this global perspective, and most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Stockholm Resilience Center. The Stockholm Resilience Center is affiliated with that Stockholm University, is to provide leadership in a time of rapid global change, to focus on measuring and assessing and providing tools for social ecological systems. They focus on 7 research areas, and in this image here, they focus on food and how it relates to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in a nested paradigm. So you have your biosphere within that, the society and economy within that. And at the top, the one that we're focusing on that I think links to the OUTSTEP group really ties into initiatives of what agencies and collective NGOs and governmental organizations do to help us in collaborating across these different goals. And I guess that's where I want to kind of focus up my attention is because of the COVID lockdown, I have not been able to actually go to the United States and participate in person anymore. And so the predecessing slides to my talk here really shows how we've been able to continue to facilitate some of that work and research and be collaborative with the OUTSTEP group. Next slide, please. And as you can see in this image, this is from that workshop in person that if you look, and this is from Canada looking down at the US, you can see that there are not as many of those cups on the Canadian border, and that's because we're still in this phase of trying to build partnerships in those watersheds in the lower Great Lakes. So Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, of course, the university that I'm at is in downtown Toronto, and we're very interested in collaborating with this group and still building those networks. Next slide, please. And an example of another potential collaborating institution is Waterloo and University of Waterloo, and the Canadian Wellbeing Index is one that's highly related to some of the work we're trying to do in the lower Great Lakes. And here the Canadian Wellbeing Index is a multi-metric index that is built on to try to measure and assess and provide tools for the highest possible quality of life. And there you can see the 8 dimensions of well-being here that they have within their index and how it relates to those 17 sustainable development goals. Again, with the partnership for the goals being kind of a standout sustainable development goals in which all of the others are resting. So you really need to have these partnerships focusing on the collaboration between government, non-governmental organizations, and of course universities in these study areas, and specifically in our case, an international collaboration with a shared border between Canada and the US. Next slide, please, Chris. And on that note, there's 2 different data dashboards that I want to point out that are out there, but more specifically, the technology that we have that ultimately we're using in this global pandemic crisis. We can think of these Internet 2.0 technologies provide us an opportunity to allow humans to move from smart citizens to smart cities to smart regions. And we started to see this technology going back to even the mid to early 2000s, such as the Notre Dame Index, which is the Notre Dame Gain Index, Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative, which is a tool that was designed to help decision makers have better understanding and make better informed decisions for climate adaptation. They have a countrywide index, so comparing countries to countries for over 170 countries in the world, and then the urban adaptation assessment tool that they're also working on for specific cities throughout the world. The lower right-hand corner is a screenshot of the Wellbeing Toronto web-based data dashboard for community well-being. It provides all kinds of publicly accessible data to help decision makers, but then also the local stakeholders that live within that city. And these kinds of technologies allow for us to continue to work collaboratively and internationally, such as the OUTSTEP groups and its goals. So under the conditions of the global pandemic, these types of technologies allow us to strengthen SDG 17, which is that partnership for building and continuing to collaborate on issues that are trying to remediate those problems associated with the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide. And here I'm going to give it back over to Chris Rentschler, and he can talk more about the OUTSTEP.org platform.
Thank you to the panelists. We will get back with the questions in a moment here. In this last slide, I just wanted to show that over these past couple of months of the COVID lockdown, we developed this community platform that allows not only to build those badges for yourself, but also to have a search function, as you can see it here on the left side, to look for particular expertise. So interest. So the idea is here really to match the interest and expertise in the sustainability goals, as well as the People's Resilience framework, and then to collaborative come up with initiatives. This is built on the platform Rocket Chat that is open, and it's fairly easy to sign up for that. So if you're interested in that, you can go to outsteps.org, and there is a contact button where you can contact us and ask questions about our project, or maybe if you're from the region here, then you can directly join our platform. But at the same time, you might be somewhere else in the world thinking about the possibility or opportunity to step out of the regular procedures that we are used to, or step out of this COVID situation, to work better collaboratively and virtually in this platform. And we could help you with that, for example. So if you're interested in, you can go there and just send us to the form your contact information, and then we can take it from there. So I want to then open it up and say thank you for your time to see this short presentation. And now we hand over to Francois with any kind of questions that we got during this presentation to the panelists.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Francois.
Great, right. And I'm so glad that you were able to take over and run this session much more professionally than I would have, since you're so much more familiar with the content. So I think that was a good fortune in the end. I would love to help, though, with the Q&A here. I am looking at the Q&A option. There are 0 questions at the moment. We have 38 people in the session. I'm sure somebody has questions for you, but allow me to start and hopefully generate some more questions from the audience here, where I've seen growing over the last half hour. So first of all, really very clear and compelling example of a cross-border collaboration. I'm delighted. I'm actually Canadian myself. I grew up in Ontario, so it's great to see this kind of thing happening. I had a question about the role of the private sector in what you're doing, in particular, since you mentioned SDG 17, which does, the private sector plays a significant role there. What do you see as the role in your activities of the private sector on both sides of the border? And perhaps connected question, how is this affected by both COVID and the changing trade relationships between Canada and the US, if at all? And I open that up for any of you to answer. I'm not sure.
I guess I can probably jump in and just talk from the Canadian perspective for a minute. Great question. So the private sector, at least in Canada, from what I've seen, is starting to shift its interest to the Sustainable Development Goals, often because of the market interest. So if it's from an economic standpoint, we're starting to see the customer base want to see corporations, businesses starting to address some of these global issues. And so I definitely see there, at least from that standpoint, they are trying to address issues associated with Sustainable Development Goals. And oftentimes, if the tech is there, if there's an interest to collaborate, if it's a technology-based interest, for instance, to maybe collaborate with the digital media zone or something else associated with the university, and we do see some of those partnerships, but I would say that that's still in the infancy of our partnerships. You see a lot more NGO, non-governmental organizations, governmental organizations at this point, really trying to lead the charge with the universities.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in a little bit. So We do have a strong, University of Buffalo in particular has a strong connection with the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable. And that represents, it's over 80 businesses in the Western New York region that cares about sustainability at some level. Some has more initiatives and things more than others. It's been a little bit challenging engaging with them on a routine basis. Our weekly meetings are during the sort of normal work hour. And so sometimes that can be challenging for some of our private industry folks to join. But we did have some engagement in our original workshop, and we do have a few folks that join us from time to time. And in particular, we think about those groups as being stakeholders more in a context-specific way. So we have certain projects that we, if their expertise is needed, or just to get their feedback, we definitely include them as on a stakeholder advisory kind of level. So we're trying to get them more engaged. It's definitely been a little bit challenging. But as Richard said, we're working on it. Yeah, we've got some connections, but we hope to improve in that area for sure.
Can I ask a question? I can't see. So at Clarkson and being very close to the St. Lawrence River, one of the things that I observe, and it makes it essential for the international perspectives across the Great Lakes, is whenever I see a map of watersheds, for example, I saw a map in the newspaper of watersheds flowing into the St. Lawrence River along the northern New York border, it only showed the U.S. side. And I think that's typical, right? And so it was just like there's no watersheds in Ontario that flow into the St. Lawrence River, where some of the most critical ones, especially the Ottawa River, is essential for the health of and the water flow in the St. Lawrence River. So I'm just wondering a sort of an informal poll across our hosts, our panelists, and the people. I see there's a lot of people both from Ontario and New York State, but also in other countries. Do your governments recognize that water resources do not know political boundaries? Or do they always present just, to the political boundaries? So I'm just wondering, is this, it is the essential reason that we need these international partnerships, because the water does not know that boundary.
Great question. I think was that internal to the group? I'm not sure who would like to answer, Susan, on that one. Provocative.
Or in the chat box for other people.
Right. I do see, by the way, that we are getting questions. For some reason, they're coming in the chat instead of the Q&A, although now we do have one in the Q&A as well. Let me, if I may, still start in the chat. I do see a question from Eileen Warley asking, is the UB initiative limited to Western New York, or is there some connection to the state or with other regions?
Maybe I'm going to take that. So the idea basically reborn is here or is born in Western New York, and we realized that there are a lot of other boundaries that we have to cross. For example, each of the states in the lower Great Lakes has got a different approach to what extent stakeholders are involved in the process of decision making. In New York State, for example, we have got the home rule, and that means that local governments have got a very high level of engagement to certain challenges, while it's not that way in some of the other states that are also in the lower Great Lakes region. So the approach is really to, we kind of like said, the region is defined and how far we can actually come within a day to visit each other and to meet each other. But now, obviously, under COVID, this is all going to turn around. But we would like that our approach here could basically help other regions around the world to define sort of an area that has got a common impact through challenges like climate change, and then take it from there.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'm going to move quickly on because we only have 5 minutes left, and now there are quite a few questions. So question from Alexandra Hineker. I'm trying to take them in chronological order. who says, "Hi, Susan. Are you also working with local civil society in Buffalo? I'm thinking of groups like Partnership for the Public Good."
Yes, and I actually typed in a quick answer there. We are working with Partnership for a Public Good. Again, they were heavily engaged in that original workshop that we had back in 2019. But they're also a very key stakeholder in a lot of the projects that we do. There's representatives from Partnership for the Public Good on that community climate change task force that I was talking about. So they do interface, they again work as an advisory role. And in some of the projects we've put forth or proposed, they have a very meaningful part in organizing community workshops and helping the university sort of interface with the communities and other community organizations as well. So yes, we are working with those types of groups.
Great, thank you, Susan. And I see that you've posted answers to 2 questions from Alexandra. That's really helpful. And so there is one, oops, that's strange. I had a question from Maria Carolina Serrano. The network is amazing, congratulations. What challenges have you found working together, and what suggestions would you give to universities around the world who are going through that path of collaborating in a similar way?
I'll take that one. I think as not the lead institution, sometimes it feels like, the lead institution is doing it all. And I think it takes some real shared vision. So one of the things that we did early on was to create a sort of a vision and a structure and an understanding of how we would work together and collaborate. The other thing that I think is essential is continued activities, right? So you can go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting and accomplish nothing. It's when you actually create a project or write a proposal, or like our current virtual fall festival that's happening right now. So I think without having those continued reasons to be a partnership, right? Zoom meetings are not a reason to be a partnership. They're a tool to help us accomplish it. But you got to have a shared vision and actually do stuff. So the more you can come up with that, actual projects that expect and require people from across the partnership to work together is essential.
Thank you, Susan. I think the question certainly is open to the other speakers. I'm sure they have other complementary answers, or perhaps.
Yeah, I think one of the initiatives we're working on is a sort of a network-based education initiative. And the idea here is, from our network, we all represent particular expertise and strengths from these diverse institutions that are part of this network. We want to leverage that strength and expertise and provide the students with access to that. However, that comes with so many challenges, different rules and processes at each of our home institutions of how classes are developed and programs are developed and how many credits can be transferred and who gets credit for teaching a class if it is sort of a network-based seminar. So we're working through some of those logistics, and what we found is we can't really create an umbrella or one-size-fits-all program. We often have to create it so it's very adaptable from institution to institution. So we found ways around it, but you kind of have to be open-minded and flexible, I guess, in the way that you're thinking about making these things work, because it definitely goes against the grain of more of the traditional, more competitive, I guess, university system.
I would like to add to that. Francois. So I think the biggest traction we have where we directly meet, have students meeting with stakeholders as part of project-based classes. And we were very successful in having students during the semester working on issues that stakeholders are really interested in. And stakeholders are also then coming to evaluate students and give feedback. Most of the things the stakeholders would already know about, but they always get something new from the students. And that's the reason why not only now, but also they're coming back since 10 years to do that. So we wanted to share that effectively with others in the network so that they also can do similar kinds of outreach approaches. And since we are as a region impacted, it is very important for us to hear from people in Toledo or at Clarkson to know how, or to hear from them from the stakeholders and the students. What did you work on? Did you go through this? Maybe it was already 10 years ago that they did something and it still haven't reached us. At least it didn't come into the classroom, and we're inspiring the young new minds that are coming in to trying to learn, and also to to find a place in this region.
Thanks, Chris. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt here. And thank you all. Thanks to the speakers, Susan, Chris, Richard, and Susan, for a really beautiful overview of a very compelling project. Thank all the people who participated, and our host here, Marcus Taylor, was telling us we do have to move on now. This is the end of the session. So thank you all for joining, and Marcus has posted the link to the rest of the sessions you may want to join for University Global Coalition 2020. So thank you, and looking forward to meeting you one day in person at another UGC meeting. Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.